Hi everyone. In part 1 of the Mastering Unity Animation System and Inverse Kinematic Small series, we talked about a couple of examples, such as aiming, where we learned about combining animations with IK and the multi-aim constraint. Today we will continue discussing more examples with new constraints and different ideas. Let's get started. The first example we'll explore, which I've named Follow Up, involves a drone whose transform is constrained to another game object. This game object moves in a circular path, and as it does, the drone rotates to face a small pink cube. To spice things up, we could also animate the cube to move up and down, and with the drone's Y position matches that of the cube, we get this amazing result. All of this is achievable using the override transform constraint, which we'll dive into shortly. Now let's go over how to set up the rig. First, take a look at this drone. I'll include a link to it on the asset store if you'd like to use the same one, though you can definitely use any game object. I've positioned the drone about 1.5 units above the ground, but the exact height isn't crucial since we'll be writing a script to align its Y position with the cube. To achieve the result you just saw, we need to override the drone's transform based on another transform, which is easily done using a handy constraint from the animation rigging package called the override transform constraint. First, I set up the rig similarly to how we've done in previous tutorials. Nothing new here. A rig builder was created along with the animator, and I added a new game object representing the rig component, which I named Follow-Up Rig. As a child of this rig, I created a new game object with the override transform constraint added to it, along with a script to move it in a circular path. Now let's break down how this constraint works before diving into the code. The override transform constraint is pretty straightforward. It allows us to override the constrained object's transform with values coming from an override source, or we can manually specify the values. Let's take a quick look at the Unity documentation for the override transform. In this example, the character's head, shown in yellow, is constrained to the source object's transform, shown in pink. Now, coming back to our example, the override source object is just an empty game object that I've positioned exactly at the center of the drone. This allows us to modify its transform as needed, and with the override transform constraint, the drone will automatically follow this game object. To make things more interesting, I created a script to move the source game object in a circular path. Let's take a closer look at the Move in Circle script. In this script, we control the movement of the source game object, making it follow a circular path, while also adjusting its rotation to continually face the pink cube you saw earlier in the demonstration. To move the source game object in a circular path and make it rotate to face another object, we need a few variables. First, we have the radius, a float value that defines the size of the circle the object will move along. Next is the speed, which controls how fast the object travels around the circle. The angle variable, a private float, keeps track of the current angle as the object moves along the circle. This angle updates over time to adjust the position. Finally, we have a reference to the pink cube. This is essential for determining the rotation of the moving object, ensuring that it consistently faces the pink cube as it moves. This variable is crucial as it stores the initial position of the object when the script first runs. This position serves as the center of the circular motion, meaning all the movement will be relative to this initial position. At the start, we cache the object's initial position, which becomes the center of the circular path. In each frame, the angle is updated by adding a value based on the speed and the time elapsed since the last frame. We then calculate the new position on the plane. The new x-coordinate is determined by using the cosine of the current angle multiplied by the radius, representing the horizontal distance from the center. Similarly, the new z-coordinate is calculated using the sine of the angle, also multiplied by the radius, representing the vertical distance from the center. Finally, we update the position of the override source by adding the newly calculated position to the starting position. Since we have animated the pink cube to move up and down, which I'll show you that shortly, we set the y-coordinate of the override source to match the y position of the pink cube, referenced by the rotation box. To update the rotation, we first calculate the direction vector from the object's current position to the rotation box. We use this vector with the look rotation method to determine the desired rotation. The object is then smoothly rotated to face the rotation box by interpolating between its current rotation and the target rotation, as calculated by the look rotation method. Let's return to the editor to demonstrate the simple animation of the pink cube. Similar to the reaching out example, I created a new animation clip for the cube, adjusting its Y position as follows. The cube rises to a maximum height, pauses briefly, then drops halfway down, pauses again, and finally reaches the ground, repeating this cycle. Now let's run the scene, and let me also zoom out to view everything. To summarize, we have an override source game object moving in a circular path while adjusting its Y position to match that of the pink cube. The rotation is computed based on the direction from the object's current position to the cube's position. As a result of the override transform, the drone follows this movement and rotation. Let me show you how the drone rotates and tracks the pink cube accurately. For our second example, I'll demonstrate how to use the multi-aim constraint to target an object while considering only one axis. In this example, a turret aims at the player as she approaches, focusing only on the axis. Setting this up is quite straightforward, so I'll guide you through the process and also show you how I handle the shooting effects. I've used a turret model from the asset store, and I'll provide a link in the description. The key feature here is that the turret's head is separate from the base, allowing precise control of its rotation. We'll apply the multi-aim constraint similarly to our previous aiming system, but this time we'll limit the rotation to the axis for the constraint setup. As usual, start by selecting the parent game object that has the animator component and set up the rig. Then, add the multi-aim constraint as a child to the turret's rig, with the source object being our character. For the aim and up axes, I left them unchanged because they align with the world axis. As we covered in the previous episode, you can verify this by selecting the constrained object in the scene view and checking its local rotation axis. We set up the character game object as the source, so the turret will rotate to keep aiming at the character. However, if we don't limit the constrained axes, the turret will attempt to rotate around all three axes, which looks awful. In the settings section, we can specify the constrained axis. Since we only need the turret to rotate around the axis, we check the Y-axis. That's all we need for the constraint. Next, let me quickly show you the script I used to handle the shooting. I attached this script to the head game object. This script is designed to make the turret fire periodically when the target is within a specific range. It handles the firing animation, sound, and visual effects. I will quickly walk you through the required components and fields. First, we need an animator to hold a reference to the animator component. This is required to play the firing animation. The fire audio source field references the audio source component attached to the same game object as the script, used to play the firing sound effect. The fire VFX is a serialized field that references a particle system representing the visual effects for the firing action. And lastly, the target transform is a reference to the transform of the target that the turret will aim at and shoot, which in this case is our character. In the start method, as always, we begin by caching references to the necessary components, and then we call a function named shoot. I am using the invoke repeating method, so the turret can fire starting after 1 second and then repeating every 2 seconds. In the shoot function, the first thing we do is to check the distance between the turret and the target. If the distance exceeds 18 units, the method exits early, preventing the turret from firing. This distance check is typically done for performance reasons, though there are more efficient ways to handle this. If the target is within range, the turret performs the following actions. Play fire animation. Resets the fire trigger to ensure that the animation plays from the start, and then sets the fire trigger to start the firing animation. Play fire sound. The turret uses the fire audio source to play the firing sound effect. And finally, play fire effect. It activates the particle system fire VFX to display the visual firing effect. Now let's take a look at the final result. After seeing how everything was set up, I also added some fog to the scene to enhance the visual effects. If you're curious about how I created the light effect where the lights turn on when the character steps onto the platform and turn off when she leaves, it's actually quite simple. I forgot to cover this in the previous episode. I placed a point light above each platform, with its intensity initially set to 0 so that it doesn't emit any light at the start. Then, I wrote some code to control this intensity to get the desired effect. To achieve this, I placed a trigger zone that covers the entire platform and attached a script to it called Light Up. Let's take a look at this script. I'll quickly break down what's happening. We have a reference to a point light to control its intensity. Using trigger methods, we check if the player enters or leaves the area, indicated by a boolean called turnOnLight. Finally, in the update method, we use the lerp function to smoothly adjust the light's intensity. It's a straightforward setup. The last topic I want to cover is handling root motion through scripting. This is an advanced technique that you may not often need, but it's important to be aware of it. As you delve deeper into game development, you'll realize how crucial it can be. From my experience working on complex systems like melee combat or parkour, there will be moments when controlling root motion based on specific in-game events becomes essential, and this can only be achieved through code. I'll demonstrate this concept using a simple example. We'll download a character model and a walk-in-place animation from Mixamo together, then write a simple script to manage the walking using root motion instead of relying on physics or code. While this is a basic example, it's crucial to understand the concept. Later, as you advance in game development and need to apply this knowledge, you can find more resources online to explore further. I'll be using this character, but feel free to choose any character you prefer. Next, let's find a suitable walk-in-place animation. This one looks great. Just make sure to select the In-Place option, as we'll be handling root motion ourselves. Download it, and then return to the editor. Import both the character and animation into your Unity project. Let's start by changing the rig type to humanoid, as we covered in a previous episode. Select the character, go to the rig tab in the inspector, set the animation type to humanoid, and click Apply to generate an avatar for the character. Next, let's address the materials by selecting the Materials tab, then extract the textures by choosing a location to save them, and click Fix Now to correct any issues with the normal maps. For the walking animation, we will change the rig to humanoid, but we don't need to create a new avatar since the animation will use the avatar from the character we imported. In the Animation tab, we can preview the walking animation. This animation doesn't include root motion since we downloaded it as an in-place animation. The root motion settings are indicated with a green light, meaning it's safe to check the Bake into Pose option. However, we won't do that because we plan to add root motion via script. Ensure you check Loop Time and Loop Pose so the walking animation continuously loops. Now let's drag the character into the scene and create an animator controller to add the walking animation. Open the animator controller and drag the walking animation into it. It will be played on start. Finally, let's attach the animator controller to the character's animator component. Make sure the Apply Root Motion option is enabled. Later, when we manipulate the root motion via script, you'll see that this property will be handled by the script. Let's run the scene to check if the animation plays correctly. Currently, the character is walking in place with no actual movement. We will write some code to move the character forward using root motion. This is just a basic example. With root motion, you can achieve a wide range of effects and movements. Here's how we're going to achieve root motion for walking. We want the character to move forward, which can be easily done along the z-axis, but we also need to control the speed of the animation. Let's look at an example of walking root motion from Mixamo. Notice how the character walks at a steady pace, not too fast. We'll use animation curves to control the character's speed, allowing us to replicate this smooth, step-by-step walking motion. In the Unity editor, double-click on the walking animation. Animation curves let us create any type of curve, whether it's ease in, ease out, or a flat value of 1, to control the speed of the walking animation along the z-axis. In the animation menu, scroll down until you see the Curves section, then click the plus sign to add a new curve. Give it a meaningful name, such as walking speed. Click on the curve to start editing it. Let's begin by creating a curve similar to an ease-out cubic curve. If you're not familiar with curves, I'll introduce you to a website where you can explore different easing functions. We want this curve to start slowly, perhaps at a value of 0.5, and gradually increase to 1, mimicking an ease-out curve. You can adjust the curve shape using the handles, and if needed, you can also add additional keyframes, but this setup is sufficient for now. After you've finished modifying the curve, exit the curve editor and click Apply to save your changes. Next, copy the curve's name because we'll need to add a parameter to the animator controller with the same name. This will allow us to access the curve's value at runtime to control the animation. Finally, let's create a script called Walking Root Motion, attach it to the character's game object, and open it up for editing. Let's go ahead and remove both the start and update methods since we won't be using them. Instead, we'll implement the OnAnimatorMove Callback. This method is a unique callback that the engine automatically calls when it's time to apply root motion. It's triggered each frame after the state machines and animations have been processed. Within this callback, all we need to do is update the character's position, specifically along the z-axis, to move him forward. We'll add a new vector 3 value to the character's current position, leaving the x and y axes unchanged since we're only interested in forward movement. For the z component, we'll apply the walking speed value from the animation curve. To do this, we need a reference to the animator component, so let's quickly create a variable and cache that reference in the awake method. Now, we can use the getFloat method on the animator to retrieve the float value associated with the walking speed parameter. This value controls how fast the character moves forward. By multiplying it by time.delta time, we ensure that the movement is smooth and independent of the frame rate. In summary, this method moves the character forward along the z-axis by an amount determined by the walking speed parameter in the animator. Alright, let's return to the editor and hit run to test the result. Excellent! We've successfully controlled root motion for an in-place animation. If you're not satisfied with this motion, you can easily modify the animation curve to suit your preference. In fact, let's try adjusting the curve to be constant, starting at 1 and ending at 1. Let's give this a shot. I'll also show you a website in a moment where you can explore various easing curves. Alright, this looks great. The walking speed is now constant and doesn't change. Let me show you this website where you can find different easing curves. You can select any curve you like and then replicate it in Unity. This website is particularly helpful because it also provides the mathematical equation in case you want to use it directly in your code. I'll include a link to this website in the description if you'd like to check it out. That's it for this episode. In the next and final one, we'll dive into something a bit different. We'll implement various vaulting actions. We'll explore a very useful technique in Unity called target matching. It might seem a bit complex, but with everything we've learned so far, it should be manageable. Until then, thank you for watching and see you soon.